I'm Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief at PharmaForum. I'm here at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco. I'm at the Zeppelin Hotel with Alexandre LeVert.
LeVert.
He is the president and co-founder, chairman, CEO, and co-founder of Osivax. Osivax is a company focused on developing vaccines for respiratory diseases like influenza. Thanks for joining me, Alex.
Thanks for having me for the discussion today.
So, first of all, tell us just a little bit about Osivax. How long have you been in the space? What are you working on?
Yeah, so Osivax is a European biotech company. We founded the company 5 years ago as a spin-off of my previous company, and we are focused on developing vaccines against respiratory viruses, with a focus on those respiratory viruses which have a really high rate of mutation and therefore can escape the current vaccines. Because we are developing first-in-class or a new class of T-cell vaccines which would have the capacity to cover multiple strains of a single virus.
So you mentioned to me beforehand that this is the dream here would be to be able to have one shot we get each year that protects us against all the respiratory seasonal viruses that are out there. How would that work? How do we get from here to there?
So it's clearly, the long-term vision of the company is to really support the development of a single vaccine that would, as you said, protect against, that would have several components, that each of the components would protect against one virus. Basically today, the main four seasonal viruses are, influenza, coronavirus, COVID-19, RSV is another seasonal virus, and then you got a rhinovirus, which is the virus causing the common cold. But there's many others, and so our long-term vision would be to really support the development of single vaccines that would have components addressing each of these viruses. How does that work? As we say back home, Rome wasn't built just in one day. It took centuries to build this amazing city, and we appreciate the complexity of the path. So we're starting with influenza today, and we're starting with the influenza component, for which we are developing, and we've been developing this for many years now, a vaccine which would be a first-in-class vaccine that has the potential to protect against all the strains of influenza.
So I'm sure that being in respiratory vaccines is not a space that's gotten any extra amount of attention over the last couple of years or anything, right? What's that been like? Since you were working on this, quietly in the background, and suddenly this new virus hits, and it's the only thing anyone's talking about in or outside of pharma. It's huge resources dedicated to finding a vaccine for it. How did that all play out from where you're sitting?
So from where we are sitting, of course, there was the pre-COVID and the post-COVID-19 era for everyone, especially, for the ecosystem which develops vaccines against respiratory viruses. Before COVID-19, we were quietly, working on a clinical stage, but with more limited resources. Let's put it this way. But with this, with a vision to really develop this universal influenza vaccine. In 2019, we were starting our second clinical trial. We had a very good preclinical package, and we were really, enthusiastic and aggressive in how we wanted to develop. And then COVID-19 arrives. For a company like us, the balance was, or the trade-off was to keep working on, on our focus, which is influenza, while of course, sharing our know-how and participating to the quest for a COVID-19 vaccine. So we appreciated at the time that we were not going to be as, fast as the mRNA or large players. So we decided to play basically, to apply the same approach that we have in influenza, basically to anticipate potential mutations, the appearance of potential variants of COVID-19. So where we are today, I think the COVID-19, this had a profound effect on the company. And I think, taking a step back 3 years down the road, we've continued to work on flu. That was important. I think that was the priority of the company, because flu is not going to disappear. Flu is still going to be a very high unmet medical need.
And that's what we're seeing in the
And that's what
quote
we're seeing today.
unquote post-COVID. Is
Yeah.
one of the worst flu seasons we've had.
One of the worst flu seasons we've had. I fully agree. I mean, and we're seeing this in the numbers, and actually, as individuals, some of us are seeing this. We were seeing people catching flu, around us. This is, we've been able to secure this, and we've done 2 additional clinical trials, and really moving forward on that front. But that, this COVID-19 pandemic has taught the world that, as you said, respiratory viruses are really important. So resources are being put into play, and that allows us to basically augment our ambition. And this has allowed us to set the ambition of this single, vaccine, multi-component vaccine against respiratory viruses. I don't think we had that vision before COVID-19. It was really mostly around flu. And now our board, our advisors, the team really supports this, vision to have a single vaccine, multi-components against these viruses, and really to use the edge that we expect to get in influenza to be one of the players that can aggregate such a multi-component vaccine.
Tell me about the nitty-gritty, the mechanism of action. And what do you guys have going on that's unique, that's helping you to stand out from others who've worked on this or are working on this?
Yeah, so that's really, as a biotech company, science comes first, and then it's about the execution. So thanks for asking the question about the science. So at the beginning, basically, we tried to think. We didn't try. We are thinking differently than the current current vaccines. What we're doing as a mechanism of action is we're using a platform technology that we developed, that one of my co-founders developed. It has been developed since 2006, so it's and improved all over the way. That allows us to basically target the internal part of the virus. So we're not limited to targeting the outer membrane of the virus. And by doing this, you're basically that basically enables you to choose parts of the virus which are very well conserved between the different strains. And the benefit would be that if you can protect against one strain, well, actually you should be protecting against all the other strains. So really, I think that the basis of the mechanism of action is we are able, thanks to our platform technology, to target the internal part of the virus. And hence we chose a very specific one, which is well conserved, and for which when you target it, you're basically able to be effective.
So this part is less affected by the mutations from strain to strain. It's less different.
It's less different. It's called the nucleoprotein. It's less different. It's kind of complicated to explain why it's less different, but there's a selection pressure, like any other, like in any component of life, but the selection pressure is actually very different than the selection pressure that you would apply on the outer membrane of the virus, and that creates much less mutations, much less heterogeneity from one strain to the other. So the bottom line is the nucleoprotein is very well conserved between the different strains, and hence, as we're able to trigger an immune response which is protective, and that is a really big milestone. We're the only ones, I think, to my knowledge, that can do that. We protect not only against the H1N1, but also against the H3N2, and actually, a wide variety of H1N1 and H3N2, against B strains, and I'm being too technical, but basically against a really wide range of influenza strains. And so the promise of such a vaccine is that we'd be able to protect against, as we're able to protect against all the past strains that we've tested, we should be able to protect against the future strains, not just the seasonal, but also the pandemic strains. And I think that's really important, given what we've lived over the last 3 years, not just being able to protect against seasonal influenza, but also being able to protect against a potential pandemic.
Right. Because not only is COVID not really going away, but there could be another COVID, right? And all the forces that caused COVID to happen haven't gone away. So we could, I mean, you certainly read think pieces that say we're entering into a pandemic era.
Mm-hmm. So I think if I refer to the same papers as you do, I think, when you talk about pandemic, the most likely pandemic to appear in the next, years, and I'm not putting a duration, is a flu pandemic, or a coronavirus pandemic. So there are other risks, I'm not, they should be addressed, but we are working on a solution that could, bring immediate protection against an emerging pandemic threat, an emerging pandemic influenza. And we also have, preclinical work going on in coronavirus, using exactly the same mechanism of action. The idea being, we need to be as a society, in 2023, the mRNAs have made a true difference, and I think this is amazing. That's a revolution that has really changed the landscape. But that being said, if we have a new pandemic, they're not ready on the spot. They don't anticipate these new pandemics. So there's going to be a window. Is it going to be a few months? Is it going to be 9 months? Is it going to be 6 months? I don't know. But there's going to be a window at which we won't have any countermeasure. So that's where we think it's important to be. But it's also about being useful every year. For the patients who actually are getting sick of influenza and are getting severe hospitalization or sometimes death. So we also want to be present in the seasonal influenza market, because that's where the need is on an annual basis here in the US, in Europe, all over the world.
So in being in vaccines, obviously it's a weird time culturally. The anti-vax movement that was sort of always been here, blew up with COVID-19. There's a lot of people who think that not only are vaccines ineffective, but that they're evil, that they're mind control tools. It's a wild world out there. Does that affect what you do at all? Do you feel any responsibility to sort of help message the science and the truth there? Or do you just not think about it and do your work?
Well, we're a biotech company, which, is in the big realm of things is actually pretty early stage. We're in phase 2A. This is to us a great accomplishment, but it's pretty early on. So today we really focus on executing, interacting with the health authorities, regulatory agencies, ethics committees. So we do things by the book. We really comply with the rules. We comply with our ethics. But we don't interact with patients.
You're not there with the public yet.
No, yeah, that's just not the stage where we're at.
Fair enough. I have been asking everybody the same one question, which is, what do you see as the biggest R&D trend in pharma for 2023? You can pick one that you feel comfortable talking about.
That's a large question. I think I'll use the filter of some European biotech company, in infectious
what's happening in Europe?
I think that the big trend is. So the big trend. What should we talk about? Scientific trend or more, let's say development trend? I think one of the trend is that the funding market is putting a lot of pressure on biotech. And so we need to be creative about how to ensure that we can, still aggressively push forward the projects that are needed. So I think, that's one point I've heard about.
And when you say putting pressure, what do you mean? But through a lot, the funders are putting pressure on the people they're funding, or there's just pressure because there's not as much funding?
No, I think there's a lot of money around. But it's just not allocated the way it used to be allocated, I think. I would say 2 years ago, lots of new rounds, companies having their valuation really moving up. I think 2022 and 2023 have been really different with the historical shareholders supporting their companies in a much stronger way. Probably M&A coming into play to kind of balance this. So I think that's likely to be a trend, I would say. I think the market really relied a lot on new rounds of funding 2 years ago with new investors coming into new companies, and I think now it's the time for 2022 has been, and 2023 will be time for kind of maturation of this whole ecosystem, I think. And then from a scientific perspective, I think that in infectious diseases, it's going to be really interesting to see what mRNA can deliver. They've delivered tremendously in 2020.
But it's still a new technology in some ways.
So what are they going to be? So what is beyond COVID-19 is a question for infectious diseases to me for mRNA. So we're very happy to see. As a citizen, I'm extremely happy to see the results that these mRNA companies got into immuno-oncology last year. Moving forward beyond infectious diseases, they have a lot of programs going on in infectious diseases. It's going to be interesting to see how the hype delivers. It's always it's kind of goes up and down. So
sure.
So we'll see.
Your vaccine doesn't use an mRNA mechanism, right?
No, yeah. Sorry.
So you're in this position of you're using something different. There's this technology that has all this hype, that has been responsible for a vaccine that people are pretty happy with, but at the same time, the efficacy rate on the COVID-19 vaccine is not great. It keeps people from getting very sick, which is good, but a lot of people got COVID through it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's one of your focuses is a higher efficacy rate. So how do you think about mRNA in that sense?
I think mRNA is a tool, that's going to be extremely useful. It's not the only modality. The modality that we use is recombinant proteins. There's the recombinant proteins that have got a huge track record in terms of efficacy and safety, more than the mRNA. I think the mRNA are bringing this flexibility, this capacity to rapidly innovate, to rapidly put on the market, with a really well-known safety profile. So I think my perspective is really that the two can live together. And when I'm saying, it's going to be interesting to see how mRNA deliver in infectious diseases, because I think it's going to give an idea about how, what will be the perimeter or the scope of each of these technologies. We firmly believe that for infectious diseases for which you don't need as much novelty or adaptation, the recombinant proteins are really competitive. Our vaccine is a universal vaccine against all strains of influenza, or and we have other universal broad spectrum vaccines in moving forward to the clinics. So we don't need to change it. It's just the same vaccine against all this all these different strains. It's going to be the same vaccine. And we had efficacy in 2019-20 right before COVID. We had the same range of efficacy after COVID with the same vaccine. We'll keep having this. We hope we'll keep having the same. We'll evaluate whether we have the same efficacy in the future, but it will always be with the same vaccine. So we don't really need mRNA to adapt it, to change it every year.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting distinction.
So, we could talk a lot about these new technologies, but I think these will be the two trends that I foresee. One is a different allocation of the capital, between M&A, funding, fundraising for those biotech companies. And then, it's going to be interesting to see how the mRNA hype, delivers in infectious diseases. There's a lot of trials ongoing. There's going to be a lot of readouts. So we'll see, where that falls. It's going to be really interesting.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. Really interesting stuff, and good luck with everything you're working on.
Thank you so much for the time, and have a safe trip back, to Boston, and thanks for your interest in Osivax.
You too.
Bye-bye.